Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for July 5th through 11th. This week I read 2 books, I watched 2 shows, I watched 3 movies, and I listened to 3 books. First this week I read Red X. This is a queer horror story set in Toronto and taking place over a couple of different decades. In this one we start out in 1984 and then we skip forward 8 years and then we skip forward 8 years and then we skip forward 8 years, so we end up in 2008. And throughout this span of time something is taking queer men and we don't really know what it is. However, it definitely doesn't feel natural. What I really loved about this is we'll learn about a character and then we'll go on to watching a different character who's somehow sort of related, and then we'll go on to completely different characters, we'll time jump, and then we'll go back and be like, oh, this character still exists, this is what's happening with their life, and this is what grief looks like for them, because usually they're missing somebody who went missing before. And this whole time there's this mystery around this red leather-bound journal, and people are trying to figure out what happened to their loved ones, and we as an audience are trying to figure out what the heck this journal has to do with anything. This one was definitely creepy and unsettling. Speaking of unsettling, let's go right into The Most Unusual Haunting of Edgar Lovejoy. This is about a guy named Edgar Lovejoy, you might have been able to guess that, and ever since he was a kid he's been able to see ghosts, and he is terrified of them, to the point where he doesn't really usually go out to social events because he doesn't want to have to deal with having to dodge around things that other people can't see. Our other point of view character in this, because this is a romance, is Jamie. They're non-binary and they are a burlesque performer by night, but by day they actually work creating haunted houses, and they actually work on the most popular haunted house in Louisiana. Now, a major difference between the two families of these characters is, for the most part, Edgar's immediate family is very supportive and warm and lovely, whereas Jamie's family is not supportive of their transition, nor are they supportive of their job. And this definitely comes to a head when they are invited to a brunch to find out that their sister is getting married. They want Jamie to be the maid of honor. No thanks. Especially since the wedding is going to be November 1st, which is right after the most busy day of the year in Jamie's career. As you can imagine, there are a couple of complications getting together between a character who literally sees ghosts and is terrified of them, and a character who creates haunted houses for a living. And yet, it works so well. I absolutely adored this. Now, before I get into what I actually watched this week, I need to talk about something I watched last week, because last week when I was doing my video, I completely skipped over it in my list. I keep a list just so I remember what to talk about each week, and I think it's because the title of it is shorter than the other text that was around it. My eye just completely skipped over it. So I watched both seasons of Vicious. This is a British sitcom from 2013 to 2015 in which Sir Ian McKellen and Derek Jacobi are a queer couple who have been together for 48 years at the start of the series, and the shenanigans that go on with their various friends who come in and out of the apartment. Besides Sir Ian McKellen, there was one other actor that I've definitely seen in things before. Unfortunately, it's an actor's name who I've never known how to say it, and I don't want to be rude, but I personally knew him from Misfits, and then you probably know him from Game of Thrones. He plays this young guy that moves into the apartment upstairs and occasionally drops by and basically is adopted by these older people, and there's an older woman who's literally always hitting on him, and that's a whole thing. But one of the main tenets of this show is these two main characters are always sniping at each other, hence the name of the show. But there are definitely some gags that go throughout the whole series. There are definitely some very tender moments. I enjoyed this. I watched this all in one day, both seasons. Get into what I actually watched this week, I watched the first 4 episodes of the first season of Future Man. This is a TV show that my roommate has seen before, but she is willing to watch with me again, and I know she's seen it before because I used to be editing these videos while her and her boyfriend were watching it, so I would overhear lines every once in a while and be like, what the hell are you watching? But I had never actually seen it before. This is about a character named Josh Futterman who doesn't really have that much going on in his life, but he really likes playing this one video game that nobody's beaten before, until the point where he beats it, and then characters from the video game come back in time, because apparently this video game is actually a training exercise to figure out who can defeat the big bad in the future. This character is also really big into sci-fi, so every time these characters are talking about things to do with time travel or anything like that, he's just like, oh, this is just a mix of this movie and this movie. And it's really fun to watch. I haven't gotten that far through it, I'm only 4 episodes in, but I am enjoying it. We We also stayed current or ahead of current, depending on the way you like to look at it, on jet lag. I don't know if there's going to be one more episode or 2 more episodes, because at the end of this episode, the people doing the "hey, thanks for watching this on Nebula" didn't know. So maybe there's going to be more than 6 episodes this season. Some very tricky things definitely happened with the map. It turns out that trying to figure out how many acres something is hard, which it would be for me because I don't know how much an acre feels like. But needless to say, I'm still very entertained. Moving into the movies we watched, first it was Normal. This is about a cop in a small town, and he's got a background where something else happened in a different place where he was the sheriff, and he's the interim sheriff here because the previous sheriff died. But there's something not quite usual about this small town, which is literally called Normal, Minnesota. And it's something that you should pretty much be able to get from the very beginning of this movie, because the beginning of this movie starts in Osaka, and we couldn't get the subtitles to work, so we didn't really know what was going on in that scene, but you can just kind of guess based on what people are actually doing. And as soon as we got to this small town and things started feeling weird, I was like, oh, okay, this small town, for whatever reason, is run by the Yakuza, and that's going to be a problem when the sheriff, who doesn't know anything about it, starts poking his nose into things. And yeah, that's basically what happened. A couple of other things happened to make that come to the surface, but yeah, that's basically it. This was also fun because every once in a while I'd be like, oh wait, it's that person. And it was really fun to be able to be like, oh yeah, I know that person because of this thing, or I know that person because he's literally from the Comox Valley, which is on my island, so every time I see him in movies I'm like, oh yeah, hometown actor. The next movie we watched is something I've been excited for since about December, when I saw a trailer for it and realized it was actually a movie that was going to be coming out and not just some weird fan-made thing, because it seems very outlandish, and I also recently found out it's actually based on a book, so I'm gonna have to read that, and that's The Sheep Detectives. This is about a shepherd. He owns a flock of sheep in an idyllic countryside in the UK, and every night before the sheep go to bed, he actually reads them mystery books. Unbeknownst to him, the sheep actually definitely understand what's happening in these mystery books and are very often trying to figure out who done it, and one of these sheep in particular seems very, very capable of doing that. So when their shepherd ends up dead, she decides that they need to solve the case, because in the books there's always lots of suspects and the police are usually inept, and somebody else has to step in to solve things. This means that this, of course, is a mixture of in-person actors and then the sheep, who are all voiced by various people that you will probably know. Like I said, I saw a trailer for this back in like December, and I've been excited ever since, and I very much enjoyed this. I'm also very excited to eventually read the book and see how it stacks up. And finally, for this category, I watched a movie called In the Gray. I went into this based on just the headline of an article I saw, which was something to the effect of 20 years after Brokeback Mountain, Jake Gyllenhaal is casually playing a guy who is married to Henry Cavill. And yep, that's a thing in this movie. However, what this movie is actually about is this lawyer who works in the gray. So she works through the law, but then she also works through some other nefarious means in order for her employer to get money back from people they've lent money to, who maybe they probably shouldn't have, but it was a good investment and it was also probably not very legal. And then she has a team of people, which are headed by this married couple, who can help her on the non-legal side of things. This is kind of like a heist movie in that they're planning to extract something from a certain place, but that something is their boss in case things go sideways when she's negotiating. I won't say this is the best movie in the world, but I definitely enjoyed it. On to the books I listened to this week, the first one being Before Gender, The Untold Stories of Trans History from 1850 to 1950. At least I'm pretty sure that's what the subtitle of this book is. If not, it's something very similar. It's definitely 1850 to 1950 trans history that you've probably never heard of. I'm sure you've heard many talking heads and people that have their own podcasts, because anybody can have their own podcast, saying that trans is a new thing and like people didn't used to be trans or whatever, but that's factually inaccurate. Being queer and or trans has always been around, and this is, I believe, 37 stories from queer history between those years. All I can say is this is absolutely fantastic. The amount of research that went into this is quite apparent while you're listening to it, and I highly recommend it to everyone. Something I don't recommend as highly is The Stranger by Albert Camus. This is something I picked up because it's one of these seasonal read-along books for Pagebound, and otherwise I wouldn't have picked it up. However, I did find an audiobook version of it, so I was able to blast this out in an afternoon because it was only about 3 hours long. This is about a man who's living in Algeria, and he finds out at the very beginning of the book that his mother, who had been living in a home, has died, so he needs to travel to where she was staying to have the funeral. The thing about this is he knows that people look down on him for having put her in a home, but also is probably the best option for her because he has to work work, he couldn't care for her, all those types of things. However, at the funeral, he doesn't cry, he's not overly emotive, it doesn't seem like he actually misses his mother, and this unfortunately comes back to bite him in the butt later in the book. He gets back from this trip, he's seeing this girl, he's not a really good character. Like, I definitely, at some point in this book, stopped and went, you know what, the only character I've liked so far, because pretty much everybody in this book is terrible, is the one woman who's actually crying a lot at his mother's funeral, because she actually seems to care about the woman that's deceased. Whereas he doesn't seem to care. He's acting kind of creepy and lecherous towards this woman who, for whatever reason, likes him. He's got this neighbor who definitely beats women, he's got this neighbor who definitely beats his dog, and while he's on a trip, one thing leads to another and he ends up behind bars for murder. And since this book is from the 1940s, I'm just going to tell you basically how it ends. If you want to skip forward to the next book, you go right ahead if you don't want the spoilers. But basically at the end, he is sentenced, and he is sentenced to death. And basically the sentiment I got at the end of it was him being like, what even is the point of life? And I got to the end of the book and I went, you know, what even is the point of this book? It did seem a little bit irrelevant to me that a lot of the people that were giving evidence in his trial were giving evidence about how he didn't seem to really care about his mom. And I'm like, how does that actually translate to whether or not he killed this person? But what do I know? This wasn't a book that I would have picked up unless I was trying to get a sparkly badge on a website, so who knows. The last audiobook I finished this week is Confessions of the Fox. This has been on my list of things to read for a very long time, so I recently put it on my Pride Bingo TBR, and I am doing very well at that challenge, especially because that challenge takes place over a year, and I think I've finished 5 books so far out of the 25 that I need to read, so I'm doing great. This book is written in an interesting format because our narrator is a professor at a college. He is a trans man and he finds this manuscript that he's really excited about, and it looks like nobody's ever checked it out of the library. It's actually being sold during a library sale, and the kid behind the counter actually just gives it to him because it's a mussy old manuscript that's never even been cataloged. So he starts looking through it and he gets really excited because I guess there's a character from trans history, at least in the world of this book, called Jack Shepherd, and it could be a very integral piece of trans history. So he starts reading this manuscript, he's making his own notes along the way about the language or different connotations of what's happening. In the manuscript it is about a trans man named Jack Shepherd, and then this girl that he's really obsessed with named Bess. They live in London, she does sex work, he thieves things for a living after he's gotten out of the bonds of the place that he was actually working, and he becomes quite infamous because he's able to get out of jails because he used to work basically for a locksmith. And there's this character in town called Wild who is basically the overlord of all the criminal activity in town, but then also is for whatever reason in charge of certain policing bodies. So it's kind of a Jean Valjean Javert situation with these two. As the text goes on, something weird is happening with the university that the professor works at, and that's the aspect of this that I was just kind of like, I don't really know why it had to be framed this way, especially towards the end of the book where things get really weird in that timeline. And I think that's where this kind of lost me. Also, this talks about sex and the act of it so much, which is a really weird juxtaposition because the professor is trying very specifically to not talk too much about the sex organs of these characters because his boss seems to be really into learning about that because it's going to be sensational when they publish this manuscript. So it was just a weird juxtaposition between this actually talking way too much about people's parts and what they're doing with them, and this other character not wanting to talk about people's parts. So yeah, I have mixed feelings on this one. Obviously I enjoy it for the trans rep that's in there, and obviously I enjoy the message that every trans person has a different perspective of being trans. But overall this book didn't quite work for me. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I'll see you very soon. Bye!